AGR was up there, that just, that meant, because I remember what had transpired in my time here.
It's so different now because all of us, I think, worked at home on the farm, and I was on a grade A dairy farm, which meant getting up at 5 in the morning and milking, and then coming to the house and eating breakfast, and then carrying the milk to the milk plant, and then going to high school, all at the same time. Once you've done that, just about anything, any other job you get's a lot easier. And I don't know that the people nowadays appreciate the work ethic as much as we were taught to appreciate the work ethic.
I'm Dan Luttrell. When I was getting my stories together, why he didn't at first didn't want to participate, and I said, Dan, you've got to, because your story will not be believed by most people, but it's true. Dan Luttrell, when he was here, he had a grade A dairy, and he was doing his milking in the morning. He went to school here, and then he went home at night and did the milking again, and then sometime in there he also ran the mail. And talk about working his way through school. There are a few stories like that. And he's not an AGR, but Ned Ray McWhirter's having his funeral today, and he always said there's two things he was never going to do in life. One was a service station, the other was a grade A dairy, because he wasn't going to work that hard.
I remember Dan Luttrell was a hard studying person, and I was just the opposite. All I wanted was the 2.0 average to go into the Air Force and be a fighter pilot, which I made, but didn't need the 2.0. It was a waste of time. But Dan was, he had ag engineering the quarter before me, and one of the things we had to build was a cold chisel, and they had to temper it and have it all, everything, get it graded at the end. Well, then they just give you a written grade, and Dan got a B on his. Well, I hadn't had time to finish my cold chisel, and I asked if I could borrow his. I turned it in, and then they started stamping them when they'd been graded in ag engineering. But after I had turned mine in, I got an A. Dan never got over it. I didn't do a thing, got an A, and he built it and got a B or a C.
I think I remember Charlie Darnell having trouble with his garden plan. And the instructor didn't appreciate that he had a roll of macaroni in that garden, as I recall.
I'll tell you something. Some of y'all might remember Frank Bale. I was from a little community called Wheel, and a lot of people called me Wheel. And one time, Prof. Bale, if he were teaching an agronomy class, he'd get so excited he'd be writing with one hand and erasing with his tie. He'd just get, but he said, we were studying nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium relationships. And he said, Charlie said, what would it be, he said, if you planted your potatoes and said, you just had the prettiest vines, but said, when you dug them, there wasn't any potatoes under them. And he was too much nitrogen in relation to phosphorus and potassium. And I said, well, Prof, the people around Wheel would say the signs wasn't right. He said, signs hell.
I think one comment made a while ago is how successful the early bunch of AGRs have been. We've got a friend in Nashville who's a Vanderbilt graduate, is a family, matter of fact. And every time my son, who's also AGR, says something to Lee Noah about Alpha Gamma Rho, he said, that's another one, and he's made $1 million. And his comment was exactly the same. He never did see a group that had such outstanding people.
Well, we have one of our brothers now is chairman or president and CEO of Tyson Foods. And although I've never met him and don't know him, that I think is probably one of the great successes. And we have a brother who's a general too.
Charlie Henry is a retired lieutenant general. Yeah, and Charlie was about 55 or 56. And we've had a number of commissioners of agriculture.
Right.
How many have we had, Joe?
Several.
Well, it started out Buford Ellington. We initiated Buford. And then, of course, Dan Wheel
Gil Thornton?
Gil
Gil
Thornton.
Thornton, yeah.
Give me a change in this thing. Patty Thornton, who was Gil's younger sister, would not come to the fraternity house unless she was escorted, even though she had a brother up here. Today, it's a solid line.
You know, talking about the money and how successful this group has been, first off, I think it started out, most of us, like myself, had practically nothing to start with. I used to go out, especially I remember after the big Kentucky game snow, when it was so deep, I went out when the snow melted and I found out a way to make money. Go to all the parking meters where people put money in with their gloves in when it was cold, dropped their change and it went down in the snow. I could pick up change at all the meters. So that's a lesson I learned early.
That's called innovative thinking.
But then the people that were not Alpha Gamma Rho, that weren't as successful, some of them are alcoholic or whatever in their life now. But some of those were rich ones, and those were the ones that were in Sigma Chi and SAE and some of the rich fraternities. We were the starters.
Well, y'all mentioned something a while ago that was big while I was here, and that's the politics. It seemed like y'all got it going, and then in the late 50s there, we controlled, Charlie, if you remember, we just controlled the farm, and at that time that was a tremendous, so what we got to be in the political party that was the strongest. We just never, we were always wanted as a group because we could bring the vote from the farm, you know. And
Lance and I helped with that once on counties and votes.
down the vote.
That statute of limitations hadn't run on that.
Well, on politics, we've got one who ran for student body president here. When Lewis came in as a freshman, I decided that people running for campus politics, first of all, you couldn't make speeches on your own, or you couldn't nominate yourself. You couldn't say anything. You always had to act like you really didn't want it. So I started nominating for Lewis for everything came up. It didn't matter what club it was, I'd nominate Lewis. Well, fortunately, he didn't win most of the time, but I had a great nominating speech, and we were having our committee meeting over here, the group of fraternities together, and Max Cobble had gone student teaching. He was our leader, so I took over. And while we were there, a guy that was going to run decided he wouldn't run. And so I was ready. I nominated Lewis for it. I got up and nominated him, and he got it. And then he ran for student body president. As y'all remember, he came out in a tie vote, which is only, I guess, the only time in history that happened here. But as his campaign manager, I was really proud of that. We got a tie vote. Then we knew the other side cheated more than we did, and they got caught. And we tried to throw it out, but George Regas was a Kappa Sig, and he decided that they weren't as crooked as we said they were, and he made us run the election over. Of course, we lost then.
Well, who took Dan Cup under their wing? Lewis, did you do that?
Yeah, I did. He was my little brother.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. A story that hitches onto that. Right after the final count was made in that election, by Greasy Leaper, who was a Sigma Nu in agriculture, came up to me actually in tears, and he said, "It's my fault you didn't get elected." I said, no, it's not. He said, "I didn't vote but 9 times." And I could have voted again, but I was sure we had enough and didn't vote.
That sounds like Memphis politics.
Joe Armstrong was my perpetual little brother, and he finally made it after I graduated, but he infiltrated the other party. He went and joined them and went over there, and they had printed up fake ID cards, and they gave him a fake ID card, and he went to vote, and then he turned them in. Well, that's what George Regas said, that and wasn't showing him they weren't crook.